There was a time when every family in Britain spent a week at the seaside. Candy floss on the pier, donkey rides on the beach, rain that everyone politely ignored. Then cheap flights to Spain happened and the British coast never recovered. Today, some of the most deprived neighbourhoods in England are not in mining villages or inner city estates, they're in seaside towns. The 2025 Index of Multiple Deprivation confirmed it. Coastal communities remain among the poorest in the country. Today we count down 11 seaside towns that tell the sad story of what happened to old Britain. Like this video if you have walked a seafront and wondered what happened here. Subscribe because these places deserve better than being forgotten. Bognor Regis stands as a symbol of the post-war British holiday dream. Then and now. When Billy Butlin opened his Bognor camp in 1960, families queued for a taste of affordable luxury. Chalets, knobbly knees contests, redcoats on parade. The town's fortunes rose and fell with the Butlins brand, its fortunes tied to a single operator for decades. Local legend claims King George V once said he would rather die than go to Bognor Regis. That line may be more myth than fact, but it still lingers in the town's uneasy self-image. Today, the Butlins resort still brings summer crowds, but just beyond its gates, the high street tells a different story. Vacancy rates climb, small shops shutter, and investment is drawn away to more prosperous neighbours like Chichester. The pier, once the centrepiece of seaside fun, now stands weathered and underused. For Bognor, dependency on a single holiday giant left the wider town exposed when holiday habits changed. The nostalgia remains, but the cracks in the old model are now impossible to ignore. In the 10th place, Skegness clings to the cheerful promise of its most famous export, the Jolly Fisherman. John Hassall's 1908 poster with its rosy-cheeked skipping mascot and the slogan, "Skegness is so bracing," still greets arrivals on the pier, a relic from the golden age of railway holidays. Yet behind the bright branding lies a stubborn truth. Skegness lives on a 4-month clock. Nearly 80% of its 1.8 million annual visitors arrive between late May and early September, leaving the promenade and high street eerily quiet through the rest of the year. Retail turnover falls to less than a third of its summer peak, and most jobs vanish or shrink to part-time when the crowds depart. For many young people, the only escape is the train to Lincoln. About 42% of those leaving the town in their 20s head there for work or study. The Jolly Fisherman endures as a symbol, but a poster cannot fill empty shops or bring back a year-round economy. Skegness is a place where nostalgia is powerful, but branding alone cannot shield residents from the hard tides of change. Number 9. Great Yarmouth stands at a crossroads between lost tradition and uncertain promise. Once this was the herring capital of Britain, its docks a hive of work where thousands gutted, packed and shipped the silver catch to every corner of the country. But as the fishing fleet shrank and the canneries closed, a whole way of life vanished almost overnight. Between 1990 and 2015, the town lost more than 2,000 maritime jobs, steady, year-round work that had anchored families for generations. In recent years, a new vision has been sold. Great Yarmouth as the gateway to Britain's offshore wind revolution. Turbine blades pass through the port, and the town is branded as a hub for green energy. Yet the numbers tell a different story. Fewer than 200 local jobs have materialised in the offshore wind supply chain, and many of those are either short-term or go to specialists commuting in from elsewhere. For residents, the promise of a new industry feels distant, while the boarded-up shops and faded amusements on the seafront remain all too close. Great Yarmouth's struggle is not just about nostalgia for lost holidays or vanished fish, it is about the risk of being left behind by the very future that was meant to save it. In 8th place, Morecambe offers a lesson in the limits of heritage-led revival. The Midland Hotel, a 1930s Art Deco jewel, reopened in 2008 after a £30 million restoration. For a moment it seemed like a turning point. Visitor numbers surged by 70% in the years that followed, and the hotel's white facade became a symbol of hope on the seafront. Yet beyond the lobby, Morecambe's High Street remained scarred by persistent vacancy. The promenades, arcades and fish and chip shops struggled to fill empty units, and many former boarding houses slipped into low-quality, long-term accommodation. Community groups rallied around the Winter Gardens, the Grand Victorian Theatre left derelict for decades. Their campaign, marked by small grants and volunteer labour, brought flickers of life, a handful of concerts and a few temporary exhibitions, but the wider town still felt the weight of decline. Morecambe's story is not one of total abandonment, but of a place where flagship projects can spark optimism without reversing decades of economic loss. The Midland Hotel stands restored, but the daily reality for many residents is shaped by fragile jobs, a shrinking year-round economy, and the sense that prosperity remains just out of reach. Number 7. Weston-super-Mare offers a lesson in spectacle without salvation. The Tropicana Lido, once a beacon of the 1930s seaside optimism, stood empty and fenced off for over a decade after closing in 2000. Locals watched as the Saltaire gnawed at its faded Art Deco curves, a daily reminder of what had been lost. In 2015, the derelict pool became the unlikely stage for Banksy's Dismaland, a pop-up dystopia that drew 150,000 visitors in just 5 weeks. Newspapers called it a masterstroke, and for a brief moment the world's gaze fell on Weston's battered seafront. Yet when the crowds left, the Tropicana remained unchanged, still shuttered, still awaiting real investment. Residents voiced frustration that a global art event could generate headlines and hotel bookings, but not lasting renewal. The Dismaland episode exposed a deeper truth. Attention alone cannot reverse years of neglect. In Weston-super-Mare, the line between cultural flashpoint and civic afterthought is razor thin, and the promise of revival often fades as quickly as the spectacle itself. Number 6, Clacton-on-Sea, marks the moment when the story of seaside decline collides with the politics of protest. In 2014, the town made headlines by electing Britain's first UKIP Member of Parliament, a result that stunned the political establishment and sent a message far beyond Essex. The by-election was more than a local upset. It was a reflection of deep-seated frustration, a community feeling left behind as prosperity flowed elsewhere. Clacton's Central Ward tells the story in numbers as well as headlines. Out of 5 neighbourhoods, 3 are now ranked in the bottom 10% for deprivation in England, according to the 2025 Index of Multiple Deprivation. That is 60% of the town's core mapped as some of the most disadvantaged places in the country. The Tendring district, which includes Clacton, mirrors this pattern with 30% of its neighbourhoods in the lowest decile. Shops shuttered, jobs seasonal and insecure, young people moving away. These are not abstract statistics, they are daily realities. The political earthquake of 2014 was rooted in this landscape of neglect. For Clacton, the ballot box became a way to demand answers as traditional parties failed to deliver meaningful change. The story here is not just about faded amusements or empty high streets, but about the consequences when entire communities feel written out of the national script. Number 5. Hastings stands as both a warning and a testament to collective spirit. In October 2010, fire tore through Hastings' Victorian Pier, leaving only charred beams jutting out to sea. It was a stark symbol of loss for a town already struggling with some of the highest deprivation rates in the southeast. Yet what followed was remarkable. When outside investors hesitated, local residents formed a community trust, raising £14 million through grants, donations and tireless campaigning. The rebuilt pier reopened in 2016, reimagined as a modern public space. For a brief time, visitor numbers soared and national headlines celebrated a grassroots triumph, but the momentum faded. The pier's financial struggles soon returned, and the wider town continued to battle high unemployment, empty shops, and a fragile seasonal economy. Hastings' experience reveals both the power and the limits of civic action. Here, a community rebuilt what was lost, but the deeper forces of decline, shrinking year-round work, out-migration, and persistent deprivation proved harder to reverse. The story of Hastings Pier is not just about fire and renewal. It is about resilience in the face of adversity and the hard truth that even the strongest local efforts can only go so far without wider support. Number 4, Rhyl, stands as a stark reminder that the story of seaside decline is not confined to England's coast. In the heart of North Wales, Rhyl West is now ranked the 3rd most deprived neighbourhood in the entire country, according to the 2025 Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. The signs of hardship are impossible to miss. The Sun Centre, once a landmark water park echoing with summer laughter, closed its doors for good, leaving behind only memories and a shuttered shell. The Pavilion Theatre, a fixture of the promenade since the Victorian era, was demolished, its site now an empty expanse where regeneration plans have repeatedly stalled. The so-called Ghost Hotel project, a promised luxury development, collapsed after government funding was withdrawn, leaving another vacant plot on the seafront. For residents, these are not just lost amenities, they are daily reminders of promises broken and opportunities missed. Shops sit empty through the winter, and the seasonal rhythm offers little security for families facing year-round deprivation. Yet even here, community groups continue to fight for small wins, organising food banks and youth clubs in the shadow of vanished attractions. Rhyl's decline is not just a local crisis. It signals a broader pattern of coastal poverty that stretches far beyond the English border, challenging the idea that the nation's seaside towns can simply be revived with nostalgia and good intentions. Coming to the top 3, Margate stands as both a promise and a warning for Britain's faded seaside towns. The Turner Contemporary Gallery opened in 2011, and it was hailed as the spark for cultural revival, a bold new landmark drawing 1.3 million visitors a year and transforming the old seafront into a magnet for day trippers and art lovers. Dreamland, once a derelict amusement park, reopened in 2015 after a restoration costing £30 million, pulling in crowds with vintage rides and music festivals. For a time, the town's fortunes seemed to turn. House prices climbed by 15% between 2010 and 2022, and the arrival of high-speed rail brought a 30% surge in commuters to London, reshaping the local property market. Cafes, galleries and boutique hotels flourished along the front, and national headlines spoke of a renaissance by the sea. Yet beneath the surface, not everyone shared in the new prosperity. Long-term residents spoke of being priced out as rents rose and affordable homes grew scarce. The seasonal jobs created by tourism and culture offered little security, and many of the high street's old shops remained shuttered through the winter. For some, the sense of community felt eroded, replaced by an influx of outsiders and a growing divide between new arrivals and those left behind. Margate's story is one of visible transformation, proof that regeneration can work, but also a caution that success for some can mean exclusion for others. The town's revival is real, but so is the pressure it brings, and the question of who truly benefits remains unresolved. Number 2, Jaywick, sits on the Essex coast as a stark reminder of how deprivation can concentrate in the smallest of places. What began in the 1930s as a grid of timber holiday chalets, cheap, cheerful, never meant for year-round living, has become one of the most deprived neighbourhoods in England. The latest Index of Multiple Deprivation ranks Jaywick's main LSOA in the bottom 0.4% nationally, a ranking that captures the depth of hardship found here. The streets, still lined with the original chalets, now hold families who face some of the country's worst barriers to secure work, decent housing and reliable services. The sense of fragility is not just economic. In 1953, a violent North Sea surge breached the seawall, killing 35 residents. That disaster is still marked by a modest memorial, a quiet warning that environmental risk never left this low-lying settlement. Today, flood maps show Jaywick at persistent risk, with climate change threatening to repeat old tragedies. For those who call it home, the challenges are relentless. Damp, overcrowded properties, rising insurance costs, and a council that struggles to deliver lasting change. Jaywick's story is not one of gradual decline, but of a community boxed in by history, geography, and policy neglect. It is a place where the old dream of seaside escape has curdled into daily struggle, and where the national conversation about levelling up rarely reaches the end of the lane. Yet behind the statistics and headlines, Jaywick remains a living place, its residents holding on, deserving more than to be reduced to a symbol of failure. And finally, in first place, Blackpool stands as the ultimate symbol of Britain's seaside unravelling. The name itself once conjured images of packed piers, ballroom lights, and families streaming off trains for a week of sand, sugar, and spectacle. But behind the nostalgia, the town now bears the brunt of every failure that has haunted the coast. No other local authority in England records such deep and concentrated deprivation. According to the 2025 Index of Multiple Deprivation, more than 41% of Blackpool's neighbourhoods fall in the most deprived decile nationally, with 7 distinct areas ranked among the very worst in England. In these streets, life expectancy is 7 to 8 years below the national average, a gap that traces the outline of poverty in the body itself. The statistics tell a story of cumulative neglect. Nearly 16% of households live in fuel poverty, forced to choose between heating and eating as winter sets in. The town's housing stock has shifted dramatically, with 112 licensed houses in multiple occupation, a 48% rise since 2010, many converted from former guest houses as tourism receded. Each year, around 7,200 people move to Blackpool, drawn by the promise of cheap accommodation, but most find only precarious work or the uncertainty of universal credit. The churn of new arrivals, 2/3 of them claiming benefits, feeds a cycle where hope is too often replaced by hardship. High street vacancy hovers at 23%, and the seafront, once the pride of the resort, now shows 18% of its shops empty. Seasonal swings in visitor numbers are dramatic, with summer crowds masking the reality of an economy that cannot support its residents year-round. The annual influx of nearly 6 million visitors generates £852 million in tourism revenue, but little of that wealth stays in local hands. The regeneration budget, nearly £620 million over 5 years, has delivered flagship projects but left the underlying problems largely untouched. For Blackpool's people, these numbers are not just statistics, they are the shape of daily life. Parents speak of children leaving for better prospects, of neighbours lost to preventable illness, of streets where opportunity feels out of reach. Yet to reduce Blackpool to a case study in decline is to miss its stubborn pride and the dignity of those who remain. The town endures not as a punchline, but as a demand for a different future. If Britain is to answer the challenge of its abandoned seaside, it must begin by listening to places like Blackpool, not with pity, but with the seriousness that real change requires. Across all 11 towns, one pattern stands out. Beneath the faded postcards and battered piers lies a deeper story of neglect, seasonal work, boarded up shops, young people leaving, and regeneration that rarely sticks. King George V may or may not have said he would rather die than go to Bognor, but these places are not just punchlines. They are homes, and they deserve far better than to be quietly left behind.